Now let's move on to a second clip from Thomas Frank in this lecture that he gave. It's going to be about TARP and the Wall Street bailout.
And so 2009 seemed to people like me, it seemed like this was a historical turning point. The George W. Bush administration had blundered into this incredible series of disasters. You remember the Iraq War, Hurricane Katrina, the lobbying scandal in Washington, D.C., and then economic catastrophe on top of all that. And it seemed like the last straw. And the wise men of Washington, where I live these days, they thought they understood what was happening. The tectonic plates were shifting, they said. Conservatism's decades-long reign was finally at an end. The age of Reagan was over, they said. The liberal age of Obama was dawning. The pendulum had swung one way, and now it was going to swing back the other. That's just how history worked. It was exactly the same script that we saw all last year, that we're seeing this year again, with commentator after commentator insisting that Donald Trump didn't have a chance and that the Republicans had destroyed themselves by nominating him. When the country fully expected him to make that change. That's why we thought we had elected him. Everybody expected it. The Wall Street bankers themselves expected it. There's this moment very early in his presidency, about a month in, where he called the Wall Street bankers down from New York to a meeting at the White House. And they go into the meeting and they are ashen-faced because they know what's going to happen to them. This is the new Franklin Roosevelt, and he's going to take them to the woodshed, just like what happened to their great-grandfathers back in 1933. They come out of the meeting and they're all smiles. Nothing changed. Instead, we phoned the runways for them, in the immortal phrase of Treasury Secretary Geithner.
All right, so a lot of really good points there. I think it's a very good point about how Obama's failure to really take on the Wall Street bankers may have in some ways led to Trump in many ways. A recent Rasmussen poll, I believe it was from 2016, found that 23% of Americans thought the Wall Street bailouts were a good idea, while 55% said it was bad. So now, actually, when the Wall Street bailouts were occurring back in 2009, it was pretty much 50-50, but since then, public opinion has changed. And I mean, I have to say, man, the perception of Obama, in my opinion, the accurate perception of Obama being a quote-unquote sellout to the big banks, to the big corporations, to big oil, to big pharma, etc., in many cases led to the idea of the Democratic Party as a whole, especially fleshed out through Hillary Clinton, who was seen as, the coming after Obama, the successor to Obama, a reincarnation of Obama, if not more extremely right. That led to the perception of her as an extreme corporatist, which in the end, of course, led to Trump. So what do you think that's an accurate idea? What do you think about Wall Street and how it related to Trump's rise?
I think Obama had to be much more strict with the banks after the Great Recession, even if it was just in a almost symbolic sense. Like, you can argue about the bailout of the banks from an economic standpoint, and that becomes a pretty muddy argument. But when the individual CEOs and leaders of each bank were able to get off basically scot-free, that's a big symbol that the government isn't standing up for the American people and punishing those who put the livelihood of the American people in danger. He should have at least punished them on an individual level.
Right, and not even that, they got $1 million bonuses.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Right, and I think the whole idea of this, these videos, this video segment especially, is that it's really interesting that Democrats are the one doing this, because usually they're going to be more, redistribution of wealth, and that's becoming obviously more prominent today, as we see from these videos especially. But it's interesting because I think it definitely did lead to the rise of Trump and Trump being elected, because people were just so shocked by how Democrats are coming into office and they're giving Wall Street all these bailouts. So it's very interesting.
Right, exactly. And the way I see it, you have two parties that have essentially converged into the authoritarian right. You look at, it's called the political compass. It charts different people and different parties, and both the Democratic and Republican Party have moved economically right and socially and in terms of foreign policy towards the authoritarian direction. And when you look at it, Like, you need two different options if you're going to attract voters. I mean, if Democrats are becoming Republican light, quote unquote, they aren't appealing to their base. And as you saw, 10% of Bernie voters voted for Trump, about 10%. So yeah, you need to appeal to your base, and you need to stand for something. And when you're standing for, we're a little bit better than the Republicans.
Yeah.
Do you really think that's going to win you an election? I mean, Clinton lost against the most beatable candidate ever. Think about that. I mean, it takes a bit more than just racism to do that, right?
Yeah. Well, if she lost to the most beatable candidate ever, then that might mean that she's
the most beatable candidate ever.
Right.
That's
But,
right.
Yeah.
Very true.
That's right. Yeah. So the Wall Street bailout. I mean, so what ended up happening after the Great Recession was the passage of Dodd-Frank, which was essentially a really watered down, kind of, a little bit change-making deal, but it wasn't anything like Glass-Steagall, which, by the way, was repealed not by a Republican, by Bill Clinton with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. So we had, Obama had all the pieces in place, as Thomas Frank was talking about, to do a massive bank reform. He could have re-implemented the new Glass-Steagall. In fact, many representatives and congressmen are still calling for the re-implementation of some brand of a Glass-Steagall Act. And instead, he did the exact opposite. He gave $1 million bonuses to these bank executives and didn't, as you said, didn't prosecute a single one of them. I think maybe there was one low-level one that he prosecuted, but it wasn't anything like people were expected. The bankers knew that they committed fraud. They were selling people loans and saying they were AAA when they were, CDOs, like really crappy loans. They committed fraud, and they came in ashen-faced, as he said, and they left with smiles.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.